Daisy, you're really not making this any easier by showering while I record this video. Can you do it at a different time or a different place, please? It's disgusting. So much licking. Prepare yourself, because here we go. It's time to bust more autistic myths. Yeah, I'd like to bust another balloon to kind of illustrate that we're going to really squeeze the life out of autistic myths, but I only could really budget for one balloon, and I actually busted it in in part one. Nevertheless, I can't bust this one because it's already busted. This is this episode, man. Autistic myths. I can't wait to get to this, and thank you so much for watching part one of Busting Autism Myths. And I'm ready to go with part two, so let's do this.
And now, here's your neurologically different host, Orion Kelly.
Hey, I'm Orion, and I'm autistic. Now, I was diagnosed autistic as an adult, so later in life. And since then, I've decided to devote my time to advocating for autistic people to make the world a better place for the autistic community. And I do that with my blogs, my podcasts, and these YouTube videos, with the goal of increasing understanding and acceptance of autistic people. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in learning more about, well, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel. Help me reach more people by clicking on that subscribe button and the notifications bell so you never miss another episode. You can also reach out and say hey on my socials. Find the Orion Kelly page on Facebook. You can check me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and the website, orionkelly.com.au. On my website, you'll find all my podcasts, blogs, videos, and you can even get in touch and say hey. So let's get started with part two of this special series on busting autism myths. And part two has got some pearlers for you. Let's kick it off with a myth that I find really bizarre. All autistic people are savants. It's a complete myth that all autistic people are savants or have savant-like skills. The kind of stereotypical movie moments. All autistic people are like Rain Man, and they mathematically can just calculate things in the blink of an eye. It's not true. And what's kind of funny is that there's a lot of autistic characters in mainstream movies and TV, but I'm not entirely sure if any of them are helping this myth. They're caricatures, they're often played by neurotypical people, and they're written by neurotypical writers. But they all tend to be savant-like, right? Or high achievers. So, okay, cool, no worries. If you're autistic, well, you're a math genius or a science whiz, or you can be a kid doctor. The bottom line is, like neurotypical people, all autistic people have their own individual challenges and strengths. Some above average IQ, some average IQ, some autistic people intellectual disabilities. So there's no one autistic mental model. You don't become a savant the day you're diagnosed autistic. Not to say there are not autistic savants or autistic people with savant-like skills. There are. It just happens when it happens. But it's not stock standard. This next myth I want to bust, I actually think is really important to talk about. I find the media can portray autistic people in the news in a very specific way that just isn't appropriate or even fair to autistic people. So, the myth we're going to bust right now is that autistic people are violent. There is absolutely no evidence that autistic people are more violent than non-autistic or neurotypical people. And in fact, research has shown here in Australia that autistic people are more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators. Now, I can tell you from my own point of view, certainly watching my son grow up as an autistic child, autistic people are almost ripe for the picking for bullying, for manipulation, for harassment, for exploitation. So this idea that we're born violent perpetrators, it's unfair and it's ridiculous. It's no different to the neurotypical world. Some people are going to commit crimes. But it doesn't mean just because you're born autistic, you have a higher propensity for violence or committing crime. It's just completely wrong. And to be completely personal and share my own experience to dispel this myth that autistic people are just violent people, I can tell you that as an adult, I can look back on my life and I've absolutely had many scenarios where I've come across to people like I am angry or I'm being aggressive or the kind of things we've just talked about, right? But this has all come from overload, meltdown. So autistic responses are uncontrollable autistic responses based on frustrations and overloads and sensory issues and things that I can't control being an autistic person in a neurotypical world. I'm obviously not saying that means that if I have a meltdown, I can violently attack someone. Well, no, I can't, and I don't. The idea that I've had moments where people thought I was being a little bit too angry or too aggressive or reacting inappropriately or whatever, you have to look back and go, well, no, it's not because I was born violent or I was born aggressive. No, I was born autistic. And as a result of that, I can have sensory overload, I can shut down, I can have a meltdown, I can be overloaded. And that manifests in almost an out of control way where it can come across angry or aggressive or violent. But it isn't that at its soul, at its heart. In fact, in my experience, and even watching my son in his experience, I can tell you that autistic people actually don't stand for bullying and actually are one of the first people to often call people out, call violence, aggression, and bullying out. The next myth we're going to bust is autism is a mental illness. In part 1 of this video, Busting Autism Myths, we spoke about autism being a disease, that myth, and how it's absolutely not a disease. You can't cure autism, you're born with it. It's a neurological difference. Autism is also not a mental illness. Autism is not a disease, it's not a mental illness. Okay, autism is a neurological difference. Now, that doesn't mean to say that mental illnesses can't occur in autistic people, because they can. And often they do at higher levels than neurotypical people. But that's a comorbidity. That's in addition to being autistic. Autism is not a mental illness. Having a brain that's wired differently makes you autistic. It allows you to see and experience the world differently to a neurotypical person. So being diagnosed with depression, anxiety, or other mental illnesses is in addition to being autistic. And as I said, there seems to be a higher proportion of autistic people that can experience mental illness like depression, anxiety, etc. And I too have experienced anxiety. It's been a big part of my life. I often wonder if all autistic people are in fact anxious at a level not experienced by neurotypical people, and therefore we don't need to be diagnosed with levels of anxiety because we're autistic and that makes us anxious. But then when I think about it, I think, well, no, that's not right. You're born autistic, and then in living your life as an autistic person with all the challenges that you must face on a daily basis in a neurotypical world, you can develop depression. You can develop anxiety. This is one of the funnier autism myths. Did you know that autism can be caused by bad parenting? Huh? So back in the dark ages, there was this theory, this view put out by some dude that cold, unemotional parents caused kids to become autistic. They called them refrigerator parents because they're cold. And basically the view was these cold, shut down, emotionless parents somehow created an autistic child through their bad refrigerator parenting. Now, since then, since the dark ages, we've clearly gone on to discover that's simply not the case. Sure, bad parenting can certainly cause all sorts of harm to a child, but autism is something you are born with. We've talked about it before, we'll say it again. Bad parenting does not cause autism, okay? Autism is something you are born with. You are born autistic, you die autistic. There's a genetic link. So technically there is a parental link, but it's only on a genetic level. And we now know that genetics plays quite a significant part in autistic people. So a lot of times in this day and age, when a child is diagnosed as autistic, one of their parents tends to realize, oh, hang on, this is just like me. And then they receive a diagnosis. And then what often happens is the grandparent realizes, hang on, I'm just like my son and my grandson, or my daughter and my granddaughter. And then you can see, oh, we didn't know this before, but now we can start to see there's a genetic link. So the idea that bad parenting causes autism is complete rubbish. Busted. Another super important autism myth to debunk right here, right now. Let's blow this one out of the water. Only boys can be autistic. At the moment, boys are about 3 times more likely to be diagnosed autistic than girls. But that does not mean for a second that women and girls aren't diagnosed with autism on a daily basis. It's absolutely a myth. Let's bust it right now. That only boys, men, can be diagnosed autistic. Utter rubbish. Women and girls are absolutely diagnosed as autistic on a daily basis. There's absolutely been a historical and traditional disparity and frankly, probably some discrimination there with regards to diagnosing women and girls on the spectrum. And I believe the research is starting to show that autistic girls and autistic women are simply better at camouflaging their true autistic self and fitting in to social situations and expressing themselves in a way that comes across neurotypical. And therefore, it's much harder to uncover the masks and to find the real autistic person inside, but they're there. And as a result of women and girls having this ability to suppress their autistic traits, not that they knew they were suppressing autistic traits, but just innately did it, this has led to, in my opinion, a real horrible history of misdiagnosis for girls and women. And in addition to that, late diagnosis. So either the women and girls who presented were misdiagnosed as not autistic, or they were diagnosed at a much later point in their life. So instead of being a girl, they may have been a teenager or a young adult, where I know many women are coming to autistic diagnosis well into their 40s. And again, this is as a result of this lack of knowledge and awareness of how to properly identify an autistic woman or girl. The final autism myth I want to blow up is one of those button pushing ones for me. So I'll do my best to stay rant free. And that is that autistic people require intervention. There is a wide held belief, I guess by the neurotypical medical world, that the best form of intervention for autistic people / autistic children is ongoing treatment to, in effect, render them indistinguishable from their neurotypical peers. That sounds good. Get someone who's born completely different and just constantly work with them until they come across exactly the same as everyone else. Conformity. When will you learn? So let's bust this myth. Autistic people don't require intervention. The intervention that people are saying autistic people require is simply dumping a massive mental load on what usually is autistic kids. A huge mental load. Lesson after lesson, therapy session after therapy session, to help them build a mask. Build a mask from the ground up to come across neurotypical. And it's really teaching autistic people how to camouflage their autistic traits. Or another way to look at it is it's charging parents to send their autistic kids to therapy so they can be taught how to act neurotypical and be discouraged to ever allow their autistic traits to come out, to be shown, which to me is just heartbreaking. It's a myth. Autistic people do not need intervention. Sure, some therapies may help from a functional point of view. That's cool. I'm up for it. But this idea that intervention is required for all autistic people is wrong. It's a myth. It's busted. Some serious autism myths busted. You're welcome. Check out more myths I've busted in part 1 of this video series of Busting Autism Myths. Click on it now. And if you'd like more of an insight into what it feels like to be an autistic person, well, there's a 3-part video series on that. You can click on the link now. So click on one of those videos and watch them all. Watch them all at once. I find that's even more exciting, you know, because I got savant skills and stuff. I don't. It's a joke. Myth busted.